Okay, everyone, this is video 3 of the at least 3-part video series dedicated to, its title is Remote Neural Monitoring, Eye Lens Implants, Gang Stalking Crimes. I'm going to segue into directly where I left off at the tail end of the second video, and I noticed that when I concluded the second video, my last statement got cut off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly mention what I was talking about at the tail end of the second video, so you can see, so it can kind of reinforce what you learned throughout the second video and towards the tail end. So I'm going to just briefly discuss some of the things that were exposed in the first and second video. These right here are non-consensual. Hold on. Non-consensual remote neural monitoring eye lens implants. Research all my descriptions to gang stalking. Okay. You should also research, sorry about the lighting, you should also research at Google how remote neural monitoring is reported to record everything the victim's eyes see, everything the victim hears, everything the victim says, and you should also research memory mapping and memory stimulation in gang stalking. Now, so let me kind of like give you, first thing I'm going to do, hold on, I got to clear my throat. I apologize for the interruptions. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just literally show you something here. This picture right here was taken on September 15th. Today's date is September... Oh, hold on a second. All right, hold on. Apologize for that. I think this is actually a snap screen. Yeah, that's just a snap screenshot. This right here is taken, I forgot what exactly date this was taken from. I know it was just in the past month. This is showing these same eye lens implants partially exposed because they're hitting me so bad every day now. I've already discussed in video 1 and 2 how these become visually apparent, transparent that they're there. So just go into the YouTube account you're watching this video through and look for the videos that show me saying at the beginning that this video is going to be titled Remote Neural Monitoring Eye Lens Implants, Gang Stalking Crimes. Okay? Because unfortunately when I upload videos I can't title them right away because this demonic crime is keeping me so busy every day. When I upload videos I gotta try and hurry up and get the hell out of the environment I'm uploading the videos at because of the massive gang stalking props I endure at those locations. Okay? And because of time constraints. Alright, so let me just expose something to you here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a very small segment of audio file that was played in the first 2 videos. Let me turn this other phone off so I can save battery because I want to turn it back on here in a few minutes to show you a couple things through it. Now, I'm going to play you a segment from a Coast to Coast AM. Coast to Coast is a national radio show that's still on to this date. This particular interview came from a show broadcasted in 2015. And I forgot the exact date. So you can probably try and figure it out by the amount of information I give you concerning it by going to Google and typing in specific keywords like Coast to Coast AM show 2015 Richard Syrett and Marie D. Jones. You should be able to then go and find out the exact date of that show, and I think you'll be able to listen to it by signing up for Coast to Coast AM and becoming a member, which is extremely cheap from what I understand. Now, so I'm going to play you an audio from that show. Listen. This is actually a segment of the audio of that show.
Many people listening, Maria, when they hear, okay, someone's hearing voices in their head, they automatically assume schizophrenia. How do we separate cases of mental illness, psychosis, paranoid delusion, schizophrenia from someone who is in fact being targeted? And apparently, by some estimates, there are something like 300,000 North Americans. Yeah, and I think that's just the people that are willing to talk about it. It's like when you try to estimate how many people have been raped. Well, let me tell you, most women will never report it. So that's only the people that have become aware that something was happening to them. And again, you think about something like schizophrenia. When somebody hears voices in their head, they go to the doctor. That's going to be one of the diagnoses that they come up with. Nobody is going to say to them, well, you may be a victim of non-lethal harassment. It's just not going to happen unless you have a really smart doctor who's up on this. But hearing the voices in the head or the clicks or the pulses or the had hallucinations, extreme fatigue and headaches, excruciating headaches that come on suddenly, mysterious skin rashes, uncontrollable twitches. People may hear footsteps inside, outside, or around their home when there's nobody there. Just a surreal sense of being watched. Some people are gang stalked, and this is literally, they're stalked by a group of individuals who follow them, who call their name out. They hear their name in conversations, and there's a group of people that they can't even identify. Some people have reported writing where they'll be out on the freeway or on a side street, and some people will turn their headlights on, and it just keeps happening over and over, so it's not a coincidence. Strange objects being left in their homes or near their homes, in their workplace, noise harassment.
Okay, so two things I want you to notate right away from that interview. And while I'm getting ready to talk to you about it, I'm going to go into another audio file that I literally just created right before I made the second video. Actually, right before I made the first video so far of this 3-part video series. Now, this other audio file is basically, it's nothing really. It's only like, I think, 15 seconds long. Now, what you're about ready to hear are two men yelling at me on Thanksgiving Day 2013 as I was on Gilman Road. I had just got off of the road itself and got onto the sidewalk that's directly adjacent to the La Jolla Hideaway condominiums. As I was riding my bike towards Interstate 5 in La Jolla, California, which is located in San Diego County, these two men came out of the parking lot of the La Jolla Hideaway condominiums and got on the sidewalk that I had just got on from Gilman Road as I was going towards Interstate 5. They came out of the parking lot, stood on the sidewalk, and blocked my ability to continue to ride my bike. When you hear this audio and then you hear the screeching sound in it, and remember, this is just a copy of this event, so it's a little shoddy, but you're going to be able to hear what I'm getting ready to point out to you. When you hear the screeching sound, that's my bike brakes. Now, you're going to hear these men yell, gang stalk, be nice, gang stalk, gang a stalk, and I'm going to F you up. And then you're going to hear me call them fucking little criminals. All right, so I'm playing this so you'll know I'm a gang stalking victim. Hold on. Oh, all right, so somehow that went back to the audio file I was just playing, even though I went and selected the audio file of this event that I went and put on this tape recorder right before I started making these videos so I could showcase them in it. So, okay, so here it is right here. So basically what they said was gang stalking, gang stalking, I'm going to fuck you up. Now, I literally am in possession right now of 8,700 audio files, literally showing people saying gang stalk, oh my god, suck my D-I-C-K, gang stalk, oh my god, suck D-I-C-K, and many other things, non-stop, everywhere I fucking go. Mostly at businesses, libraries, all businesses I go to, inside and outside. And they've also switched over to massive color coding in the past year and a half, 2 years. Black and white, blue and white, stripes, dots, waves on coloring of clothing, items that they're carrying, okay, items that they might be pushing, like just the baby strollers. Shoes are a big thing that they're using for the color coding. So research all that to the sensitization method of gang stalking, repeating words and phrases, repeating identical words and phrases, and gang stalking, sensitization, and color coding. Now, my fellow American citizens, I mentioned in the second video that sound harassment and visual harassment are two of the main things done in gang stalking for the sake of auditorial and visual brain entrainment. So let me give you just a real brief synopsis here on how easy it is. Concerning, because a huge aspect of how they're achieving auditorial and visual brain entrainment has to do with memory. So in the second video, I showed this circle. And this circle, you can imagine this circle as being somebody's head, and the white part you see, you can imagine that as being the face. Okay? So you'd have the two eyes here, the nose here, the mouth here, and the ears here. Now, right above the ears are your temples, your right and left temple. This is a brief synopsis of some of the things I exposed in video 2, and then I'll segue into the continuation of this video series. So, the right and left temple is dedicated to auditorial processing and memories. The right and left cranium, which is at the back of your head, at the bottom of the head, right before the neck meets up with the base of the head, is got to do with visual processing. So the right and left temple has to do with auditorial processing and memory, and the back right and left cranium plays a huge role in visual processing. Now remember, the remote neural monitoring that is being perpetrated in gang stalking crimes, two of its main features and functions is visual and auditorial. Now, these are remote neural monitoring islands implants that were discovered in my eyes in a live Periscope broadcast on June 3rd, 2020, and they have been captured in many videos since. And I just widely discussed these in video 1 and 2. You also want to copy down this YouTube URL link so you can bring it up and then watch it. These biofilm light crystal ocular islands implants that it directly interface remotely with remote neural monitoring by and through the perpetrators, enable them to see everything I see. It enables them to record everything I see. It enables them to send video streams to them, forcing me to see what's sent to them in my visual cortex, including video streams and photos. That's what the light crystals are all about. And if you look very closely at this, you see the dots, the little white dots that are part of the column. Those little light dots, those light crystals act like pixels in a camera. And they stretch out and are arrayed in rows and columns throughout the entire part of the biofilm that runs across the entire part of the eye. Okay? You should also research electronic synthetic dreams and remote neural monitoring. And those are nothing but visual productions that they create through extremely sophisticated computer software and whatever visual production they create, which also has audio attached to it, just like a movie. They then create them and then project them into the visual cortex, and they can use these island implants for that as well. Remote neural monitoring does it all. And that's for the sake of trauma and to assist also in visual entrainment. Okay? To the unconscious mind. Now, so I am hit. 2 days ago, I got hit in the right and left temple and the right and left cranium over 50 times in less than 5 hours. Okay, 2 days ago. Absolutely. Okay? I have been hit in the right and left temple, the nose, and the right and left cranium over 5,000 times just in the past 2 years. Now remember, what's the two main things that remote neural monitoring is doing as a result of its neural hacking with the victim? Auditorial and visual. The right and left temple is dedicated to auditorial and memory, and the right and left back cranium is dedicated to visual processing. Okay, and then you should also research at Google and YouTube, remote neural monitoring and memory mapping and memory stimulation. Google all my statements, baby cakes. Now, so let me get into kind of where I left off at in the second video. In the second video, I was talking about how remote neural monitoring can be used for thought manipulation. Just hear me out, because when you watch this video series, your mind's going to be blown. The key is to listen to all my descriptions and research on Google and YouTube, and to go back and continually watch these videos so you can take what I state and incorporate it within your understanding from the data from the research descriptions. Because what you're hearing is how gang stalking crimes, what they do, and then you're hearing how they do it. You're hearing how the remote technologies work, their features and functions. Then you're hearing how it's concerning what's reported about how the technology is being used and incorporated within the criminal expedition of gang stalking, so you can see the neural influencing, the neural manipulation, the extreme trauma and torture connected to these sadistic bitches, so you can understand what these filthy whores are doing and why. Now, so I'm going to tell you a small, fast story here, real fast. So bear with me just a second. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to draw. You're going to understand this in a second. It's going to be very simple. You're going to easily understand it, and then it's going to enable you to see it. Okay? So bear with me 2 seconds. Okay. So say this right here is you. You're a neighbor in a neighborhood. That's you. Number 1 is you. Number 2 is your neighbor. Number 3 is a person in the neighborhood that you were told about by neighbor 2, which is your neighbor, and he told you you're number 1. So number 2 is your neighbor. Your neighbor told you, which is number 1, about another guy that lives in the neighborhood. He's number 3. Okay? So the neighbor walked up to you and told you about this guy that is also known to live in the neighborhood and the fact that he's breaking into people's homes. Right? Now, so you've been told by your neighbor, he's number 2, you're number 1. Your neighbor told you about this guy, number 3, is breaking into homes in the neighborhood. Right? So you immediately know who your neighbor is talking about because you already have a visual memory reference of who this guy is because he has been seen in the neighborhood walking up and down the sidewalks and stuff like that. So your neighbor tells you about this guy. Now, once he tells you about this guy, you're immediately going to know who he's talking about because as he's telling you, he's describing who he is, who the guy is that's breaking into homes, and so therefore your brain is going to kick back a visual memory of who this guy is. Now, so all this was done, let's say, on June 1st. Okay? Then on June 5th, that same neighbor reapproaches you and tells you that the house you live in, the house behind you, or the house you live in, got broken into. As he's telling you this on June 5th, that visual memory of this guy is going to immediately be excited back in your mind about this guy. Because your neighbor is telling you that we also suspect that he was involved in the break-in of the house that's right behind your house. So as he's telling you this, your visual memory of the guy who's reported to be breaking into homes is going to immediately flash in your mind. Now, as that visual memory is being excited, as you're being told this, your brain is processing that visual imagery and the dialogue into what is known as a neural pathway. These little circles are called neurotransmitters. That's holding all this data. The memory reference, the visual memory reference of the guy, and the circles can also, you can also picture those circles, the neurotransmitters holding the verbal dialogue of what you're being told, the content of what you're being told. So now the brain is creating what is known as an auditorial and visual neural pathway. Because as you're being told this, while you're seeing the visual memory references of who he's talking about, who your neighbor is talking about, who he's talking about as he's telling you, all that information is being streamed along a neural pathway in your brain. That's why when he reapproached you on the 5th and started telling you about your neighbor's home that lives right behind you, their house being broken into, your brain immediately kicked in the visual memory of this guy. Okay? While you're processing all the dialogue that your neighbor's telling you about that break-in. So your brain is processing the visual imagery of this guy and the auditory information you're being told by the neighbor. That's creating what is known as an auditorial and visual brain, a visual entrained pathway. Now, as a direct result of the visual imagery from the visual memory and the audio dialogue, which is auditorial entrainment, the visual memories is visual entrainment, the verbal dialogue is auditory entrainment. Now your brain has created what is known as an entrained pathway. Because what do you do when you start a new job? You're trained about how to make a pizza. That's training. Every time you get a new job, say you get a new job at a pizzeria, and your boss teaches you the first 5 times you work how to make 5 different pizzas, that's because you're in training. Because what's happening, every time you make a pizza, your brain is remembering how to make it, what ingredients to go on it, based on what you're being shown, seen, what you're seeing him tell you to do. Put the sauce on first, put the cheese on, put the pepperonis on. You're seeing your boss show you this. That's visual entrainment. As he's telling you the order of putting the sauce on first, the cheese on, the pepperoni, that's auditory entrainment. Training a new employee, brain entrainment. Now, this is how the brain creates neural pathways based on what it sees and hears. This is what gang stalking does. Brain entrainment is the whole goal behind the community-based harassment and all the sound technology and all the staged events. So let me give you an example. Say if you got a victim who's got these types of non-consensual remote neural monitoring lens implants in their eyes. They put them there in your eyes non-consensually. I have no memory whatsoever of how these got there. I've only had surgery once in my entire life, and that was to have wisdom teeth pulled back in '85. That my ex-husband took me to the dentist where that was done. Okay? Now, I've never had been in any audio accidents or any other type of accidents or any other reasons to have any surgery where anesthetic is used. So how did these get in my eyes? And I already know for a fact they were in my eyes in Michigan. And I moved out to San Diego from Connecticut in 2011, and I went to Connecticut from Michigan. Okay? So, they can record everything you see. So let's say if they create the homelessness of a gang stalking victim, including a woman. Listen very carefully. So say if you create the homelessness of a gang stalking victim, let's just say a woman, and that woman is then forced to use wooded areas. So let's say if you got a wooded area that leads off a road. Okay? So here's the road, and then the victim walks on the road and then walks down into the wooded area. Everything that victim sees who's got these types of eye lens implants in them, the perpetrators are recording. So they're seeing the road the victim's on while the victim's on the road. They're seeing that the victim got off the road and started going into the woods. And so let's say when the victim is on the road and they're going off the road and they have entered the wooded area, that victim, as they're going off the road and leading into the wooded area, is seeing all the surrounding of the trail that they got on, its surrounding landscape, and then as they continue, let me just draw this a little further, and then as they continue along the trail, they're going to step off it because the trail might step off into different directions, okay? All right, into other trails, and then maybe when they get to a certain point off the trail, they see an open area, and they say, okay, this looks cool. I'll walk off the road, I'll get on the trail, I'll go down the trail until it leads up to this area, and then I'll sit here and sit down. Every single thing that victim saw from everything they saw, period, 24/7, every second of every minute of every day, is recorded by these sick, filthy, human trafficking, mass murdering, raping, gang raping animals who are interfacing with the remote neural monitoring eye lens implants of the victim who has those. Okay? Any and all victims who have them. So everything the victim sees is recorded. So when they go off the road and go onto the trail, all that surrounding landscape is seen. All the surrounding landscape of every single step that victim takes going into this area. That includes the trail itself and all of the landscape, all the trees, the bushes, everything. Okay? That gets recorded by them because they're interfacing with those eye lens implants 24/7, every second of every minute of every hour of every day, including when the victim's sleeping. Why do you think victims are enduring electronic synthetic dreams connected to remote neural monitoring, connected to gang stalking, which is also discussed in this YouTube link? Yeah, so since they can record what the victim sees, when the victim is coming along this part of the trail and then maybe going around this corner, there's a specific part right there. And the victim, as they're approaching this corner, sees what this area looks like as they're approaching the corner. So when the victim comes down in this area and sits here and then leaves the next day, goes back out and about in the community, and then comes back, when that same victim is approaching this spot, they can flash a visual image of what they recorded the last time the victim was at that spot. And then right when that flash occurs, okay, what they'll do is, they'll flash a visual photo of what that spot looks like. And then right after they do that, they'll flash another visual imagery of a prior staged event when the victim got assaulted or by a homeless person that they propped up on the property, whether it be at that property or a prior wooded area, whatever, and or they'll they'll transmit a visual image of just a homeless person, okay, into the visual cortex, including buying through using these visual implants. Remember, memory mapping is connected to the right and left temple. So on all dates, on prior dates, when they propped up homeless people for that person to see at wooded areas, they recorded that. So when this person is seeing a specific part of this landscape, okay, they're seeing it through the victim's eyes. So they program their computer on their end to when the islands implants are processing that part of the landscape, their computer is programmed then to send a visual image to the victim's visual cortex of a homeless man, while simultaneously transmitting V2K with voice morphing. Oh my God, I hope there's not a homeless man on this property. Now what they're doing is they're trying to trick the victim into believing they're having an in real time thought about another staged event occurring. Why? Because they know they have forced that gang stalking victim to experience repeated, almost identical events using homeless people. Now let's go back to this part up here. Remember what I told you about the neighbor telling you about this guy breaking into homes on 6/1. Then on 6/5, the same neighbor approached you and told you that the neighbor that lives behind you's home was broken into and that he suspects this same guy did it. So then all the visual memory references start to come back with the dialogue. So every time they do this to the gang stalking victim, when the gang stalking victim gets off the road and start going down this trail, if they've used that property more than once, the first time the victim used the property and went down the trail, they snap screenshotted pictures of what these islands implants saw. So then therefore when the eyes see the same landscape as they're approaching it, the computer on their end is programmed to transmit to the victim visual images of past staged events at wooded areas using homeless people. While they're simultaneously using V2K with voice morphing, oh my God, is there going to be a homeless guy in here? Am I going to be assaulted or robbed? Let's see if anything happens. Okay? Now that's done in order to force the brain to process the dialogue and the visual imagery of what gets transmitted to create a visual and auditory trained pathway while they're stimulating fear in the brain and or heterodyning fear onto the brain that was harvested from another victim when that victim was experiencing a trauma. Go to Google and YouTube and research gang stalking, okay, heterodyning emotions from gang stalking victims. Because they can take the fear that was experienced by one victim's brain, the emotional cluster frequencies from those emotions of fear, harvest them from one victim and place them onto another when they're experiencing this type of manipulation, to force the brain into believing that they're experiencing in real time fear to a current thought when it's not even a thought. It's a memory reference and visual cortex manipulation by them sending this visual imagery. Just like, so you see, on 6/5, when you're told that the person that lives behind you got their house broken into, your brain immediately remembers the conversation from the first time you were told about this guy. Okay? So if your neighbor comes up to you and says, this guy over here is breaking into homes, you're going to remember who he's talking about because he's referring to somebody that lives in a neighborhood that you've seen before, right? So you're already going to have a visual memory of that person. So as soon as he's telling you about that person, your brain's going to spit that visual memory of that person. Then when he retells you on the 5th that your neighbor that lives right behind you got his house broken into and that he believes that this guy did it, that's going to stimulate the first memory, right? Welcome to visual anchoring and auditory anchoring connected to gang stalking crimes, connected to memory mapping, memory stimulation, and staged events. It's why they're staging events against gang stalking victims, which are called street theaters, to create episodic visual memories so that they can then be retransmitted back into the visual cortex, trying to trick the victim into believing they're having an in real time thought about a staged event in real time, possibly occurring again, because they know, the victim knows, that they will repeat identical events. So in other words, say if you got a victim who's been forced to endure 10 different staged altercations with homeless people at wooded areas. These were all staged in order to create those visual memories. While they're recording everything you see, they then retransmit something they record on June 1st back into your visual cortex on August 2nd, 2 years down the road as you're re-entering a wooded area. And while they're doing that, they're simultaneously using V2K with voice morphing to make you think you're having an in real-time thought, oh my God, are they going to stage another event? Because they're flashing that visual imagery back into your visual cortex in real time as they're using the V2K with voice morphing. Okay, I'm entering the wooded area now. Am I going to experience another staged event while they're flashing that visual imagery back into your visual cortex? This is done so that every time the brain reprocesses what they're transmitting into it visually and auditorily, it creates an entrained pathway. And then every time they continue to do it, it reinforces it. And then guess what happens after it's done 300 times? That entrained pathway creates what is known as an extremely potentiated frequency output from it. Therefore, anytime any visual imagery or any continued V2K with voice morphing is projected back into the visual cortex and or the auditory cortex from these two separate types of modes of operation, it will then stimulate that entrained pathway. Then remote neural monitoring can latch onto in real time. Okay, now this is where possibly brain-to-computer interface implants come into play at. Remote neural monitoring is already nearly hacking onto you, but what they're doing is once they stimulate this by sending the visual imagery to the brain implant and or the eye lens implants, causing the visual cortex to receive it, it excites this potentiated frequency output from this entrained pathway to fire. That enables them to stay locked onto the victim for hours at a time. Onto that entrained pathway, including forcing the victim to re-see the images over and over and over again. So why do you think you heard in this audio file where this lady who's an author of a book about these crimes said that victims are hearing footsteps in their environment? Because if they can make you think that you hear somebody over in there, that's going to stimulate these memories of how people have approached you and then assaulted you. It all works together. The auditory and the visual. And the auditory, the footsteps can come from ELF broadcasting, Holosonics, the audio spotlight, and or V2K. Because they can play around with your depth perception as they're perpetrating V2K. Okay? So research all my statements. So now you see the torture. Then what they're creating is neural trauma loops. These are called, I've seen victims say the same thing on Twitter. I literally seen a tweet one time on Twitter where victims, the whole tweet was about that victim saying that this crime is intentionally creating neural trauma loops. Okay? Neural trauma loops. Forcing the victim to constantly see, okay, my mind's eye is telling me, okay, I'm approaching my areas. There's going to be a homeless man there because they're flashing a visual imagery of homeless people in your mind, in your visual cortex, while they're simultaneously using voice to skull with voice morphing. Oh my God, is there going to be a homeless guy in here? When you see a certain spot along your regular route, because they took that visual imagery of that spot. When you see that spot, that executes the BCI command to send this visual imagery to your visual cortex while they're simultaneously transmitting V2K with voice morphing. Oh my God, is there going to be a homeless guy there? That forces the brain to process these manipulations that are sent to the brain that then entrains the pathway. Okay? So welcome to the whoredom and the terror that victims' minds are being forced to process while they're stimulating fear. So the brain is believing it all. The brain is believing it as a projected in real-time current thought concern. Have a good day, everybody.